So apparently, last week or so, I made a video about the GR4, and in my mind, I was just thinking it's about time for a GR4. Like, I've actually been looking back at all of the various GR models, back to the GR Digital, back to the GR film cameras, obviously the GR1, the GR3. I don't really count the GR2, it's not really an upgrade, but my point is, I've been looking at all of these different cameras and just thinking, yeah, it's about time for a GR4. It makes sense in the market. However, it kind of doesn't in the sense that the GR3 is kind of taking off in its own weird way and it's kind of trending. So I almost feel like, do you do that and why, ride the wave of the new trend, or do you try and take advantage of it and sell something new? I would imagine that there is a bit of a stockpile of the GR3 at this part in its life cycle. And, one of the things that I always respected about Ricoh, and to some extent Pentax, is that they're still a profitable company. Like, everybody makes fun of them and everybody's like, they're the smallest and they don't have all of the quote-unquote best features. And yet, everyone I know who's a Ricoh photographer makes money. And Ricoh makes money, and they're profitable. And like, I feel like the people who are, Nikon and Sony and Canon people, they're like, I don't get it. And it's like, well, Nikon's losing money, hand over fist. And a lot of these companies, like Sony, loses more money than they know what to do with. And, Ricoh doesn't. Why is that? Like, why is this small company that nobody cares about in a lot of ways, in the grander sense of the world, how are they making money when Sony is not? And it's like, well, Sony is one of those companies that's like, it's about market share and there's eventual profitability and we can sell that to an investor or to the bank or to something else. And Ricoh is small enough where they actually need to see that profit now. They're not going to take risks and chances to get a market share that's going to cost them money so that they could eventually have profits. So their strategy is like, how can we cut things to the bone so that whatever meager money comes in is enough to not only cover our expenses, our cost of doing business, but also feed us and take care of us. And I feel like that's just a very interesting way to do life. It's an interesting way to do business. It's the way, I feel like it's a very conservative way to do business. And it's, the way a lot of people should do business. This modern debt economy that we've gotten ourselves into, I don't think it's helping anyone. I think we're finally starting to recognize that this is not the best thing in the world to be doing. So, I was looking at my GR3 and just kind of staring at it. I'm recording on it, so I can't show it to you as I'm recording on it, but just how minimal it is. Like, the sensor, when it came out, it was old. When it came out, it was old. Like, people were like, 24 megapixel sensors, APS-C have been out for forever, right? I'm willing to bet it wasn't one of the more modern ones. And even at that time, even when it was coming out, it was, the 26 megapixels had just come out. And by that time, Samsung's 32 megapixel thing had already, hit the market. And then you've got all these other, things now where I think Fuji's up to 40 megapixels. And, why? Like, that's always the biggest question, is like, why does any of that matter? Is my photography going to go to this new plane of existence because of a couple of megapixels? Absolutely not. The glass, the lens might help, so like they did that in-house. But like a lot of the, parts and things inside of the camera are old. Like the IBIS system works great. Everyone, when they're talking about the GR, they're like, oh my god, it's got an IBIS system, that's amazing, it's great for my photography. But like, compared to what? Like, there's so many better IBIS systems out on the market. Like, it's not so many stops of correction that you're going to be able to like shoot these super long exposures handheld. It's not that. It's meant to just help, to be of help to the consumer who's using the camera. And when you start looking at it as like, what can I actually do with the camera, and not how does it compare to something else, is really the beauty of Ricoh and of the GR. And when you start looking at your life that way, it's like, what can I do with what I have, instead of sitting here worrying about what I don't have and being jealous of other things. I think a lot of, the Ten Commandments and religion and things of that nature are down to gratefulness and gratitude. Don't covet, because the opposite of that is being grateful for what you have. So there's something about a mindset of going into something where you're going to struggle and you're going to do without, and going in with the idea that that's okay. I mean, I feel like that's what a marriage is it's going in knowing the person I'm marrying is going to have faults. The person I'm marrying is going to have problems and weaknesses, and there's going to be times that those faults and weaknesses are an imposition upon me, and I'm going to have to deal with that because they're going to create a problem that's bigger than them that I have to deal with. And I'm pre-committing that when that day comes, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to deal with their crap. Because in reverse, I'm not so great myself, and I'm going to make them deal with my crap. Getting a little philosophical here. Anyhow, talking about where I think the GR4 will go. Like I said, as soon as I made my video, I found out that the designer of the GR was in the press talk saying there will be an announcement soon. Still hasn't been an announcement. Not really sure what the holdup is, but I'm not really sure that they need a GR4. Like there are things that I feel like could be done better. Slight improvements, of course. Like you can Kaizen to extremes. But again, I feel like part of the Ricoh GR philosophy is that, we're not going to just throw something at you to buy every chance that we get. Like, it might take us 5 years to make a new camera. And guess what? We put so much care into your old one that, yeah, there might be some new features on the market. Hell, it was probably outdated when we sold it to you. But it's going to last. It's not going to Sony firebox it and overheat and destroy its internal mechanics. It's not going to, not take a pretty picture. There was nothing flawed about the camera in what we said it did when we sold it to you. So in 5 years, when the next one comes out, it'll still be a usable camera, and there will still be people out there who are like, hey, I really preferred the old one, but here's the new one. So with that in mind, I still think, for all of my complaints, the way to do this, the way to make the perfect GR, is to go full frame. The reason I say that is this. GR started as a 35mm film camera. And the original GR digitals were 1/1.5 inches, something like that. So I think that means smaller than the 1-inch sensors, because sensors were expensive, and in order to get the camera out at a reasonable price, which at the time I want to say was like $600 to $800, somewhere in there. I mean, inflation and all. And then when the GRs came out, they were about $1,000 for APS-C, but that kind of offsets with inflation. And nowadays, I feel like with inflation, to get to around what $1,000 had been, you're looking at maybe $1,300, $1,400, $15 tops. And could you make a full frame GR for that money? I think from a technical standpoint, could you make a GR full frame? The answer, of course, is yes, because they made film camera GRs that were full frame 35mm. So like the physics of this is not impractical. Now, could you just go and take one of the lenses from one of those 35mm film cameras and bring it over? Of course, I think that's a starting point. But I think you would probably want to increase sharpness and a few other qualities with that. So I'm sure that there's some R&D required. I'm sure that processing speeds and things of that nature need to be updated. But how many megapixels realistically do we need from a full-frame GR? Low light is one of those things that's really good about the current GRs. So, trying to go for a modern 45, 60 megapixel sensor, that doesn't seem like something that makes any sense. So an older 24 megapixel or an older, I'm thinking the 36 megapixel that's already used in the K1 that, they already have some sort of supply chain with. That makes sense to me. So a 36 megapixel, slow running, full frame sensor, or, an older 24 megapixel sensor. And I'm sure there's so many of those on the market, Sony's old ones. We're not talking one of the more modern 24 megapixels, like what's on the new Canons or, even the BSIs that the Nikon mirrorless uses. But thinking something along the fact of like what Nikon uses on their D750 and their old D600s, somewhere in there. Like the old A7 Mark II sensors that, I'm sure there's a lot of extras out there that could be sold. Yeah, you're not getting 4K, you're not getting all the things. Dynamic range boost, low light boost. Put a good lens on that, and I feel like you've got a product that could be built and sold for $1,500 and still be profitable. And it's still a boost for, like, compared to the GR3. So I feel like when I think of the lineage of GR and Ricoh, that's what I think of. Now, the reason against that would be one of the reasons why also think of it like this: if you could get that camera out there for $1,300, as a price point, you blow away any perceived better quality in the Fujifilm, which is a direct competitor. Any perceived being better on the Fujifilm side, you throw a full frame against that for the same price at $1,300, even $1,400, $1,500. It's not a comparison anymore. And it's smaller, more compact than that, and you're throwing full frame. Like, I don't think there's any competition anymore. I feel like GR just wins hands down, and Fujifilm is committed to not doing a 35mm sensor, because the idea that their only 35mm sensor is going to be in their non-changeable, like their fixed lens camera, that just doesn't make sense to me on how Fujifilm is selling, because they're selling around 35mm. Like, the whole idea is that it's either APS-C or medium format. So they've tried their hardest to sell the idea that 35mm is overrated. So I don't see them changing that for this at all. So there's a win. The 1-inch sensors from Sony and Canon, no longer competition for reasonably about the same amount of money. No longer competition. The full frame sensors now that you're competing with is a very dated Sony R1 Mark II or something like that, which is very old at this point. Not to complain, but it's hard to find, and they're very expensive. I want to say they're like $3,000. You do half the price. It's no longer competition. And the Leicas, which, again, like, there's no competition there because I think those are like $6,000. So if you're roughly a sixth of that or a fifth or whatever, 1,500 versus 6,000, okay, that's a fourth. Yeah, I don't really see competition there in terms of price if the performance is similar enough. I don't expect it to have all of the Leica Q functions. I don't expect it to have 4K or a modern sensor or all the, technical digital wonders of the new Leicas. But you give it to me for a fourth the price and I can take just as good of photos. And arguably I like the Ricoh lenses better. I know, I'm weird. Yeah, I don't think you have competition anymore. Now, again, I think that part of the problem here is the K1s, as good as they are, have had a couple of issues. One, the original didn't have the best autofocus. And then when they updated it with the Mark II, which wasn't even like a fully different one, it was basically firmware, they both made the autofocus better while messing with file formatting to where it softened images, which ticked a lot of people off, and it was baked into the raw file. Probably not the best move. So I think to a lot of people, Ricoh Pentax is an APS-C camera company, which I think hurts them, largely. So I feel like there's talks of a K1 Mark III coming out soon, which I think it should. If that is the case, and you're trying to make the case for full frame being associated with this company, I think the GR being full frame, again, makes a lot of sense. I also think, while I would never buy it, updating the very outdated 645Z, I feel like that makes a lot of sense. I realize that medium format sensors largely don't improve, that the 15 megapixel Fujifilm medium formats are largely the same sensors in the 645Z. I get it. But 100 megapixel variation would be helpful. The real question there is, because the lenses are older, I don't know if they were built to resolve to 100 megapixels, which could create kind of a weird middle ground for Pentax trying to sell a new system and develop new lenses on a new sensor, when really all they can resolve is 50, and if that's the case, then there's no new 50 megapixel sensor. So they're kind of in this weird holding pattern middle ground. I don't know. But I know that they can't completely stand still, but I also know they're doing fine. And if you think about it, I bet you are too.